With the help of Hashem, we are learning Beitzah Daf Chaf Aleph. We left off on Daf Chaf Aleph, 5 lines from the top of the Amid. The first topic that we will discuss today is regarding an animal that partially belongs to a Yid and partially to a Goy. Chetzia shal Nachri v'chetzia shal Yisrael. Chetzia doesn't have to be 50% ownership, but for example, that there is actually a ha'arama that is advocated by the Chazal in order for us to get out of the challenge of owning an animal that has the kedusha of a bechor, is that if you own animals and they are about to give birth, that we actually want for a goy to be a partner, even in a minor part of the animal, in order for us to be removed and for the animal to be removed from kedushas bechor. In other words, it was really not that uncommon that a Yid and a Goy had a partnership in an animal. And the question is regarding preparing such an animal for Yom Tov, beginning with shechting it, as we learned that even though there is a dispensation, food-related melachas are permitted explicitly in the Torah to be done on Yom Tov, but that's only lachem and not for a Goy. So what happens if there is a Goy that also owns the animal? We will actually learn that there is a difference between shechting an animal that is jointly owned, which we'll see is permitted, because the only way you can eat a kazayas of your part is by shechting it. Your act of shechita doesn't demand more shechita or more work just because it also belongs to a guy. Makes no difference. Versus, for example, if you're baking a dough, the dough is jointly owned between a Yid and a Goy. Here it's problematic to bake all of it, because here, since you can separate the dough, you can divide the dough, only bake the part that belongs to a Yid. And again, the dispensation of Meleches Oichel Nefesh is only lochem and not to a kuti. We're going to learn yet again how Rav Chizda does not subscribe to the Hoyel principle. This is something that we spoke out in the beginning of the whole sugya of Eruve Tafshulin. We're going to repeat it, the machlokes that we have in Psachim Memvav, and we're going to learn a machlokes Tanoim, whether one is allowed to prepare food on Yom Tov for animals. I know that we already learned the Chazal, I think it was yesterday or 2 days ago, Lachem v'loy leklavim, but we will see that this is actually subject to a machlokes Tanoim, whether you can have non-Jewish guests on Yom Tov. We spoke out yesterday, but we're going to learn here inside the Gemara. There's really a machlokes about it. And actually, there's even a machlokes whether one is allowed to have a goy as a guest on Shabbos. We'll see what the issue might be over there. We will also learn throughout our Gemara that muktzah has many levels. There are different levels of muktzah. A muktzah that is created because something is prohibited halachically, even to derive benefit. The isurei hana'ah that creates a muktzah is actually the most stringent type of muktzah. That's a very interesting concept. And on Daf Chaf Aleph Amud Beis, we're going to have yet another machlokes between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel, and we will learn something beautiful. That even according to Beis Hillel, that says mitoich shehutra for oichel nefesh, any malacha that may be done to prepare food, that same malacha could also be done, even if it's shaloi l'tzoyrech oichel nefesh, which is why we are so lenient and so many did them today. However, listen to these words: if you are doing something that's einoi shave l'chol nefesh, if you're doing something that is not commonly done by all the people, the example that we will see is that in the times of Chazal, most people did not bathe every day. We're speaking about being completely submerged in water. So could you warm up water to take a bath on Yom Tov? We will see that even according to Beis Hillel, you may not. You can warm up water for drinking, for cooking. Why would you not be allowed to warm up water for bathing? Because it's bathing the whole body was not then, at least not then, shava, common to most people. That's a very important halachic concept, which has a lot of practical applications. And if we'll have time, we're going to learn the Mishnah that records the 3 dinim, which Rabban Gamliel, right, the head of the Sanhedrin, he was machmir like Beis Shammai, which is an anomaly. Normally we pass on like Beis Hillel. One of them will be, now we'll begin at least the sugya of hatmana, insulation, insulating food, taking food that's already hot and putting it into a material that won't add to its heat, but it's simply going to insulate, making sure that it doesn't lose its heat. That's something, as we learned in Masechta Shabbos, that is asur midrabanan to be done on Shabbos, not when it's moisav hevel, even if it only maintains the heat. You can't do it on Shabbos. So we're going to learn that Rabbi Gamliel was machmer, that you may not insulate, let's say, water on Yom Tiv, which is Erev Shabbos, for Shabbos. And the question will be, why not? It's Yom Tiv. On Yom Tiv, you can actually warm up the water. Why would you not be allowed to insulate the water? Now you're doing it for Shabbos, and we'll begin the sugya. We're going to have various approaches in explaining that. Chumrah, Chavra, let us start on Chaf Aleph, Amud Aleph, again by the 2 dots, 5 lines from the top of the Amud. This is mamish, a loaded, packed, beautifully packed daf. Says the Gemara, Boyi Minei or Ba'a Minei Rav Avia Sava, the elder Rav Avia asked once from Rav Huna, if there is an animal that Chetzia Shal Machri, that partially belongs to a non-Jew, the Chetzia Shal Yisrael, and partially belongs to a Yid, animal that belongs to a Yid may be slaughtered on Yom Tov, even though the act of Shechita is a Av Melacha, but that's classic, Tzoirech Oichel Nefesh, you're violating a Melacha for food-related purposes. But here it also belongs to a non-Jew, and we learned that this dispensation of lochem is only for you, for Yidden, and not for Goyim. So can you shech that animal on Yom Tov? All right, you have one single animal, one act of shechita, but some of it will be to the benefit of, some of it will, you can say that you're preparing food for a Goy. Amalei, to which Rav Huna responded, muter, because you're not doing any additional work. The only way the Jew can eat even one little piece of his part is by doing the shechita, which is permitted. So by the fact that his single act is also going to sort of prepare food for a guy, that's not a reason to disallow it. Amalei, hold on. Now,
Rabbi, wouldn't the Gentile have to give permission for him to slaughter the animal?
Oh, for sure. He's doing it with the permission, for sure. Yeah, we're not speaking about the financial laws over here. And like we mentioned in the introduction, I want you to know that it's common until today, if for a Jew who owns an animal, to have a non-Jew own part of it, because when a Jew is the sole owner of an animal, when that animal gives birth if the first offspring is a male, that offspring is automatically consecrated with the sanctity of the firstborn animal. And there are many halachic consequences because of that. And it makes everyone's life very difficult. And now that there's no temple, we actually advocate for you to make a partnership for a non-Jew to have part ownership in the mother. Therefore, you get out of the challenge of how do you manage a Bechor animal? Okay, now Amalei, so Rav Avia Sova asked Rav Huna, why are we speaking about this right now? If you remember, we had 2 opinions as to what does Beis Hillel hold. One opinion holds that if you have a private shlamim carbon, you may not bring it on Yom Tov. Why not? Don't forget that every carbon shlamim is partially consumed by its owner. Now, why would you not be allowed to do it? And the answer would be because it's not only, it's partially consumed by the owner, but it's partially, so to say, given to God. And as this Shita holds, that if it's not a Yom Tov related carbon that has to be brought on Yom Tov, even the Beis Hillel, don't bring it on Yom Tov. But why not? Why not? If parsh ownership justifies doing an act of shechita, I want to eat that meat. Part of the shlamim is going to be eaten by me. That's a great question. And Rav Huna, for some reason, Dafke did not want to answer the question. He blew away Rav Avia Sava. We have this every now and then, and he completely changed the topic. Whoever the modern word is, he gaslighted him, he blew him away, however you want to say it. Amalei, Rav Huna responds, ooh, urva parach, wow, look, a raven is flying by. Look at the raven. Now, Rav Huna's son didn't understand why his father didn't respond to the question. So Kinofik, when Avia left, he saw Rav Huna doesn't want to respond. So Amalei, Rabba, the son of Rav Huna, told his father, Rav Hainu Rav Avia Sava, isn't this Rav Avia Sava that you, dad, that you, tata, praised? The Mishtabach Mar Bigavei. You once told me about him, the Gavra Rabbahu, that he's a great man. So why would you blow someone away if you respect him? So Amalei, to which Rav Huna responded, Uma Avadle, what can I do? And he quoted the pasuk in Shir Hashirim that the pshat of the pasuk many of us will feel tomorrow, and that is that when you're very weak, you need to eat. When you need to eat, it's very difficult to use your mind. You get all focused on, I have to eat something. And the pasuk is that Ani Hayoim, actually this question was asked on Yom Tov. So he wasn't fasting Yom Kippur, but as Rashi says, when they would give a shiur, the shiur was like a 5-6 hour class, and the teacher would use all of his mind. When he would finish teaching, he would be exhausted and hungry. And he says, today I'm samchuni ba'ashishus. Sustain me with delicious cakes. Ridafuni, run after me with sweet apples. In other words, I need to eat. To answer the question, I'm going to have to give a reason. I can't just give him a simple answer because he's going to challenge my answer. And all of that will demand more mental exertion. And now I need to eat now. Okay, fine. So he didn't answer it of Aviyah then. So the Gemara wants to know what's his answer. And as you'll see, the words are easy to understand, but you'll see why these words actually is something that one can debate. The time am I, what's the reason that you may not, according to the Shita, that Basil holds you may not bring the Darim and the Davis and Yom Tov? Why not? Some of it is going to you. Because Behema Chetzer Shel Nachri v'Chetzer Shel Yisrael. And therefore, Mutter L'Shachta B'Yom Tov, because it belongs partially to a Jew. And the E, Efshel Kazayis, Basar B'Loi Shchita. You can't eat your Kazayis without Shchita, like we mentioned. Okay. You're doing the malacha only for the Jewish owner. The fact that there is also benefit to the guy, so what? Good for him. Is the reason why you cannot shechter on Yom Tov. What's the question? Isn't a korban shlamim partially consumed by its owner? Isn't it partially consumed by kohanim? It's not only achilas govoya, it's not only eaten up on the altar. Says the Gemara that is a shita of Rav Huna that the kohanim kizahu, when the kohanim take their part, and this doesn't only mean the kohanim. Rashi says this also means the owner. Mishulchan gavoya kozahu. It's not their food. In other words, when you bring a korban, even the korban is that the owner ends up taking a part of and eats it, and he has a mitzvah to eat it. He's not eating his. All of it belongs to God. It's God is inviting you to eat on God's table. God is allowing the kohen to eat on God's table. But it's not yours. And therefore, lochem v'loy legavoya excludes the permit, does not allow you to violate a malacha, even if you end up eating it. You're not eating your own food. And now you can stand the milsa b'taima. These words are easy to say, but the milsa b'taima is because you can counter this. You can say, no, that maybe only that which goes on the altar belongs to God, and that which was given to the kohanim is a gift to the kohanim. Matnas kahuna. That which the owner ends up eating belongs to the owner. And this affects many, many halachas, how to view that food. If you remember, right, the whole machlokes between Avmeir and the Chachamim regarding Ma'aser Sheni, is it yours? Is it not yours? L'mayin of Kamina, could you be Makadosh a woman with it? Will she become Mikudeshes or not? All right, so that's this topic over here. And Rav Huna knew he's opening up a sugya that will take a lot of koyach, and he needed to eat. And so at that moment, he blew him away. Okay. Amar Rav Chizda, continuing with the same topic. Like Rav Huna, Mutter l'shachta b'Yom Tov, you are allowed to slaughter it on Yom Tov. The dispensation is only for you and not for non-Jews, because the efshel kazayis basar b'lo shchita. However, in contrast, if you have a dough and it belongs partially to a non-Jew and partially to a Yid, here we don't say you can bake it. Asur la'afoisa b'Yom Tov. You may not bake it. Why? Because you, while you're kneading it, you can divide it and only put in the oven that part that belongs to a Jew. Look inside the second Tosfos. Did we not just learn on Daf Yud Zayin, at least one Tana, Rab Shimon ben Elazar, that a woman is allowed to fill up the oven with bread on Yom Tov, even though she only needs to have one loaf, because the bread bakes better when there's less circulation in the oven, when the heat is more condensed in the oven. So why don't we say the same over here? And Tosfos gives a beautiful difference, that even if we're going to say that Rab Chizda agrees to Rab Shimon ben Elazar, Every loaf that you put into the oven is a loaf that you, the Jew, will be allowed to eat because it all belongs to you. We just don't know which one. So that also helps the permit of putting it all in the oven. But over here, it says Tosfos, some of it does not belong to you. That's going back to what doctor said over here, what Baruch said. Since it doesn't belong to you, even though you have permission to bake it for him, he didn't give you permission to eat it. So it's more removed from you. And even though your loaf will come out a little bit better, so what? So what? Here already you're not allowed to do it. That's the first answer in Tosfos. Let's go back in the Gemara. Okay, so a loaf, dough has to be divided before you bake. Masev Rav Chana bar Chaniloi against Rav Chizda. We learn in the Mishnah Masechtas Chala regarding Isas Kalavim, a dough that is normally made, or bread that's normally made to give to dogs, dough baked for dogs. This was a dough that had flour and a lot of coarse bran. I know that nowadays bran is a big yichis, but even then it was very coarse bran. Now, the more that type of bran you put in that dough, the less it was edible for human beings. Says the Mishnah, if there is, so to say, a relatively lesser amount of coarse bran, and meaning that sometimes shepherds, when they're hungry and that's all there is, they would nash on that bread. Means if it's shaykh, if it's possible for a human being to eat from it. So we classify this into bread, and therefore you have to separate challah, and therefore it may be used, it could be used to make an eruv chatzeros. It may be used to make a shituv muva'os. You have to make a bracha on it. If 3 people ate from it, really it's not 3, 2, or even 1, and when you make the zimun, 1 person has to make a zimun because you ate human food. And here's the question, and therefore since it's human food and not animal food, even though only shepherds eat it, but it's human food, and you can bake it on Yom Tiv. And if you make matzah or adam yotzeh by yedei chavasa Pesach, you can be yotzeh your obligation. Okay, end of quote. Here the point is we're going to focus on the second to last din in the Mishnah, that it's ne'efes b'Yom Tiv. Why can you bake it on Yom Tiv? Why can you bake it on Yom Tiv? Right? Some of it was made for dogs. If anything, the shepherd will eat some of it, but some of it not. If Rav Chizda is right, don't forget, we're going on the premise, and there is such a shita by Tanoim, that the dispensation of oichel nefesh, food-related malachas, is permitted only lochem and not for animals. So just because a shepherd will eat some of it, why are you allowed to bake all of it? Answers the Gemara Shani Isas Kalavim Hoyel ve'efsher lefaison benavela. Might come out if you find a carcass. The dogs would love to eat the carcass more than the dough. In that case, the shepherd will end up having all of the dough for himself. All of the dough will be used for humans, since it's possible for such a scenario to happen. So we applied the principle of hoyel. Since it could happen, we view all of it as human food. Hoyel, says the Gemara, Rabbi Chizda. Umi islay Rabbi Chizda hoyel. Rabbi Chizda doesn't subscribe to the principle of hoyel. And v'ha'itman, guys, this is the source. This is the beginning of the whole sugya of Iruvei Tavshilin. If you remember, Rabbi and Rabbi Chizda. Let's go to the case that we have in Psachim. The question there is, if a person bakes bread on Yom Tov for the weekday, Rabbi Chizda says, fine, he's chayiv malchus. Rabba, who agrees that theoretically it's a biblical violation to be mechen from the Yom Tov to the weekday, Rabba holds you're not chayiv malchus. Why not? Because ain't a loika. And Rabbi Chizda says loika. Let's go by heart. Rabba says, because since guests might come on Yom Tov after you bake the bread, even though you made it for the weekday, it might end up being given to guests. So from the outset, we say you didn't violate a biblical violation. And Rabbi Chizda, who says you do get malchus, why? Because since if it will come out and guests will come, that which you baked will be given to them on Yom Tov. So therefore, hashtanami chazile, even though guests are not, we don't know if guests are coming, we already view it as food for Yom Tov. That's Rabbi Chizda. No hoyel. Rabba says ain't a loika because we say hoyel. So what do you mean? You might find a carcass to give to your dogs. That's not enough. Answers the Gemara, don't interpret the case of the Mishnah as since you might find a carcass. When does the Mishnah say that you are allowed to bake isas, klavim, on Yom Tov only if you actually have a carcass? In that case, since the vadai efshelafaisan, you would have the carcass. Do you already know whether you're going to give the carcass to the animal, to the dogs or not? You don't need to know that yet. But since you have a carcass, there it's already different. There we view the entire dough as a dough that high likely will be eaten by the shepherds, because why would you give it to dogs if you have other foods that the shepherds cannot eat, will not eat? Use that to feed to the animals, leaving more food for the shepherds. Okay, next. They asked of Rafuna, Hani b'nei baga, people that live in villages, deramu alayu kimcha b'nei chela, that they were under governmental orders. There was a governmental imposed responsibility that when soldiers travel through the villages, the Yidden that live, it was a Jewish village, they're obligated to bake, they're obligated to cook food for these soldiers. These soldiers were non-Jewish soldiers. Question is, are they allowed to cook and bake on Yom Tov? No, guys, obviously, if it's in a scenario that if they refuse to bake and to cook today on Yom Tov, they're going to put their lives in jeopardy, pikuach nefesh, that wasn't the case. It wasn't a pikuach nefesh case, but they wanted to know, listen, normally we understand we cannot cook and bake for goyim. What about if they are obligated to do so by governmental order for soldiers? So it's better. It's a lot more comfortable if we can find a heter. So ma'ula foisa b'Yom Tov, can you bake for them on Yom Tov? So Amar Lahu, to which Rafuna responded to these b'nei baga, that like this, a gavaldik criteria, a great way of understanding and ruling whether you may or may not. Chazina. Let's say the villagers will bake and cook food for the soldiers that are there. And the soldiers see that. But then the owner, the balabas or the balabasta, what happens if she will take any part of the food that she made? She won't eat it herself. That's right, it was for the soldiers. But she'll give it to her child. How will the soldiers react? If the loikapte, they're not going to be angry, because at the end of the day, it was being baked by the Jewish hosts, and they're giving it to a kid. So here we say, Rav Huna now says that since any part of the food that you're baking potentially could be given to your child, so that's not called you're making it for the goyim. You can justify making it on Yom Tov. So we say kol chada v'chada chaz yelianuka v'shari. Now, guys, this is a heter. I would say that if it would not be this pressure that you have to make food for soldiers, maybe we wouldn't go that far. But this is a proper heter, not pikuach nefesh, because you can argue that every part of the food might be given to them, as we will see. As we will see, this logic that since any part of the food might be eaten by a Jew, I know we quoted yesterday or 2 days ago, and we're going to learn it today in the Gemara, the question whether you can have non-Jewish guests on Yom Tov. According to this opinion, you can have non-Jewish guests on Yom Tov. And even if you prepare more food, which one is going to the non-Jew, you don't know. Kol chada v'chada liyanuka shari. Liyanuka. But if the soldiers are so tough, and if you would take any of this food and give it to a Jewish child, they would get upset, then you're making it solely for the soldiers, then you're not allowed to do it. Okay. Have a question on that. We learned in a Beitzah, Maisa b'Shimon hatimni, or hateimani. One time on Yom Tov, he didn't come to the Beis HaKnesses. No one forgot that. It's recorded over here in a Beitzah. Don't miss. And the next day, they didn't leave him off the hook. So b'shachris in the morning, Mitzoy Rav Yehuda ben Bava, Rav Yehuda found Rav Shimon hateimani, and Amar Loin, he told him, Herst Yasi, why weren't you yesterday over there learning? So yeah, he said like Amar Loin, that Baleshes Bali Irenu. Baleshes is, again, it's a group of soldiers. A group of soldiers came to our town. Now, it's not that we needed to make food for them. They were soldiers. They helped themselves. If we would not make food for them, they would make a churban in our village. They were planning to plunder everything. So to preempt the first white line, we had a calf, and we slaughtered it for them, and we made a nice meal for them, and we sent them off in peace, and they didn't bother us. All of this happened on Yom Tov. So so that sounded like the best excuse. Imagine the yeshiva boy doesn't come. Wow, he saved the whole city from plunder. So Amaloi, what were they going to plunder? They were going to plunder finances. It would be a physical loss, not a spiritual loss. That Tomeya Ani, I wonder imloi yotzos charchem behefseitchem. I wonder whether you lost more than you gained. Like Rashi says, what did you gain? That there was no plunder. You gained gashmias. What did you lose? Chilul yamtiv. You lost ruchnias. Sharei amra toiro lachem v'loy lo'ev lekechavim. Oh, so now asks the Gemara, hold on, according to the logic of Rav Huna, va'amai, why was Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava critical? Havachazi lemechel minei. Right, same thing. They were not even forced to make food for them. They were just very smart. They preempted plunder by making a meal. But if any one of the hosts would have taken one part of that food, they wouldn't have had any kindness. So why would that not justify making the entire meal, even if it ended up being that they ate up all of it? So there's no chilul yamtiv. So what was Rabbi Yehuda's ben Bava? Why was he criticizing Shimon HaTimni? So says Rav Yosef, no, that case, they didn't make food that was kosher. They had a calf that was treif. They knew they can't eat it anyway. So they used that to feed it to that baleshes, to that battalion of soldiers. Oh, so since a Jew was unable to eat, that's why he was criticized. Asks the Gemara, and now Atkan, again, with the premise until now is that you can't make food for animals on Yom Tov, but not our Gemara. Even though it was treifa, since you could have given it to animals, and he holds that making food prep for animals on Yom Tov is permitted. So why are you saying that they lost, that there was a hefset?
Rabbi, can you just clarify
yes.
So they had an animal that they knew lechatchila was a treifa before they slaughtered it?
Yeah, they knew that because in other words, they needed to get rid of this battalion. So they thought amongst themselves, let's use a food that we anyways can't eat. They were trying to cut their losses. Question is, did they cut it to the point where they violated Yom Tov? So says the Gemara that this question, whether food that's fit for animals, that you're making potentially for animals, whether you are allowed or not allowed to do it on Yom Tov, that's the Tanoyi, 3 lines before the bottom of the Amid. The Tanya, Pasuk and Boy. The Pasuk is really about Pesach, but it's about all Yom Tov. Something that's meant to be eaten by nefesh. Now, who's nefesh? Nefesh means the pshat of nefesh means a person. Just to know, nefesh doesn't mean a soul. A person. That Adam was nefesh chaya. So nefesh, since the Torah uses the words nefesh, says this Tana Shemeya Ani, I would argue that afilu nefesh behema b'mashma. Nefesh in the Chumash can be used for a living animal. Making food for animals, you're making it l'chol nefesh. Where do we find that? As it says, this is at the end of Parshas Emor, that umaka nefesh behema, if someone hurts a animal, then yishalmena. Then you got to compensate the owners. How do we call an animal? Nefesh behema. So if the Torah beginning with the words nefesh actually would have led you to think that you are allowed to prepare food for an animal on Yom Tov, nefesh. That's why the last word in this pasuk is lochem for you. Daf Chaf Aleph on the base. Lochem only for you, only for human beings. Actually, only for Yidden that we learned before. Lochem v'loy l'kutim, but lochem v'loy l'klavim. So holds Rabbi Yossi HaGalili. All of that explains why Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava criticized Shimon HaTimni for making food for the Baleshes. However, but Shimon HaTimni had whom to lean on. Rabbi Akiva Omer, no, afilu nefesh behema b'mashma. You are allowed to prepare food on Yom Tov for animals. Im kein ma tamud leimer lachem. What does the lachem exclude? Only for you, and not for goyim. V'loy loev dekechavim. Yomaru isel rabbi says haklavim loheitzi yasoev dekechavim. Do you see that? Is there anything in the scripture that indicates? So the Gemara answers, as it normally does, no, but it's logical. Marbani is haklavim. Why would it make sense for us to permit preparing food, even if violating otherwise a malacha on Yom Tov for your animals? Because the sustenance of our animals is on us. If you own a pet, you're obligated to feed your pet before you eat. There's such a responsibility. So now we understand why Shimon HaTimni and his Chevra did do what they did, and why Yehuda ben Bava argued and challenged their action. Says the Gemara, we're in the middle of this. Amar le Abaye le Rabbi Yossi. Ule Rabbi Yossi Haglili. According to this opinion that holds Lachem ve'loy leklavim. Hane sufle lechevasam. They used to commonly throw pits to animals. Now listen to this, the way many Rishonim learn that when you eat a date, the pit, the way it is difficult for the animals to eat. What they would do is that they would chop it up. They would work with it. Now that type of work is food preparation. And what's the problem with that? Problem is that according to you that we may not prepare food for animals, something that is difficult to be eaten in its current state, the animals should by default become muktzah. And therefore, how can you throw it for animals? Hey, what's if you're going to hold that a yid is allowed to prepare food, even by cooking, baking, violating an otherwise malacha for animals, even though the pits still need to be chopped up, so what? You're preparing it for animals. But now that we established you may not prepare food in a way that you're violating a malacha for animals, so if something is not good as is, lachatchila for animals to eat, l'choyra should become muktzah. So amalei, no, I'll tell you why it's not muktzah. Because hoyel v'chazul asaka, because they pits, not chopped up the way they are fit for fuel. We are allowed on Yom Tov to put fuel in the fire, whether it is to create heat, whether it is to make water, drink, or to cook, or to bake. So therefore, fuel is not muktzah. That should only be true, Tanach, beyabeshta, if the pits are dry and they are fit as is now for fuel. But if you have moist pits, shouldn't they be muktzah? And again, it was common practice that people would take moist dates and they would chop them up and give them to animals. So Amarle, no, even if they're moist, if you have a very large fire, if you have a hesed gadol, large fire is not intimidated by moist pits of dates. They're also considered fit as they are for fuel. Tinach b'yamtiv. What about this Shabbos? Now the question is, this question of Shabbos, is it only on Rabbi Yossi Haglili, or is this a larger question? There are whole different ways of learning the Gemara. Bottom line is that it was common for people to take pits on Shabbos and throw them to animals. What about muktzah? So the Gemara clarifies, yes, on Shabbos they're muktzah. And the right way of giving these pits to animals is not moving them directly, but metal telina lohu, move those pits, agav rifta, when they are on top of a piece of bread. Once you're moving the piece of bread, you then are allowed to move the pits as well. And this is going into a topic that we had in Masechta Brachas, regarding, on one hand, we may never be disrespectful or destructive to food, especially bread. There's a certain amount of kavod that we show to God by honoring the food that God gives us. However, can bread be used in a non-disrespectful way for other things? That's a question. And we are going to follow the opinion of Shmuel. That's more liberal. That's more lenient. The Amar Shmuel, Adam kol tzarchei bepas. You can use bread for your other personal needs. We learned in brachas, not in a disrespectful way, but that's not called disrespectful. Putting pits or having pits already on top of bread before Shabbos and moving it to give it to animals is 100% okay. Okay, and now the way we will learn the Gemara is going back to this whole topic of, can you prepare food for soldiers? The first question they asked the Bnei Baga from Rav Huna, who responded, as long as if you were to take a piece of the food that you baked, that you cooked, and give it to a Yenuka, if the soldiers won't get angry, then we can say that every piece is potentially for a Jew. That was a very lenient way of looking on it, and the Gemara says this is in disagreement with Pliga de Rav Yeshua ben Levi. Rav Yeshua ben Levi, And by the way, we paskin, you are allowed to invite a non-Jew to sit around your table on Shabbos. Now, goy sheshavas chayev misa, he's not being shoivas. He's simply partaking of a Shabbos meal. 100% okay. But ve'ein mizamnen es anachri b'yamtiv. You may not invite a goy on yamtiv. Why? What's the issue? Because gzeira shema yarbe b'shvile, because you might make additional food for the goy. This is very important. We'll speak it out soon when we come to before the Mishnah. No, it's nowadays, thank God, there's such an abundance of food for most of us over here. Whether you have one person more or one person less, it makes no difference. But let's begin that you might end up making more food for the goy, and therefore it's usher. Now think about it. According to Rafuna, why would it be usher? Wouldn't be usher. Even if we know you're going to make more food for the goy. You have 5 tomatoes because there are 5 people. There's another person around the table. You're going to cook another tomato. So what? But which tomato will you be giving to the goy? You don't know. We can say on each one, this is the one that's going to be given to the Yenuka. This is the one that's going to be given to the adult. According to Rafuna, that allows you to make all of them. And obviously, Rabbi Shua ben Levi is more machmir. So going back to the case of the soldiers, he will not allow the Jewish villagers to make food for the soldiers, even though they will allow for you to take some of it, or if you would give some of it to a child, they will not get upset. Rav Acha bar Yaakov Omar, let me tell you something. You are quoting me a shita that holds that you are allowed to invite a goy on Shabbos. I'll tell you that afilu b'Shabbos namaloi. You cannot have a goy guest around your table. Why? Listen to this. Mishum shiure koisos. Here we go. It was common, I know in Brazil, when people drink coffee, they dip the bread in the coffee. At times of Chazal, they would dip the bread in the wine. So when you would serve a cup of wine to your guests, you would always end up with shirayim. I'm saying that because if you wouldn't dip food into it, then you would drink up the cup. Now the wine, so some of the bread gets fabreckled, gets crummy, and there's some stuff in the bottom of the cup of the wine. So what? I'll tell you so what. Wine that was consumed by a non-Jew, right, midrabanan, for sure, is asur b'hana'ah. Asur b'hana'ah. So therefore, it's muktzah. You're creating muktzah. Says the Gemara, hold on. Is it muktzah only because a goy drank from it? What about when a yid drinks from it? You know, whatever remains in the bottom of the cup, wine and breadcrumbs, is repulsive. That's also muktzah. And the answer is, we don't consider our shirayim muktzah because since chazi latan goylem, the chickens you have in your backyard would love to have your make a l'chaim on your bread and crumbs. So it's not muktzah. Well, they do nami chazi latan goylem. So why can't you give their shirayim to the animals you have in your backyard? Says the Gemara, no, that's the big difference. Difference is didhu when it comes to yayin asurei ananinu. But now that we learned above, Shmuel had an eitzah, why don't you move the crumbs on top of the bread or the pits on top of the bread? Okay, so what if it's muktzah? Vili taltino agav kasa, it isn't a cup. Cup is not muktzah. So since you are allowed to move a cup, would that not allow you also to move the shirayim in the bottom of the cup? Milay Amarava, didn't Rava tell us that metaltalin kanuna? Kanuna is some sort of portable heater. Here we're speaking about a portable heater that already has ashes in it. We're speaking about ashes that were designated prior to Shabbos and Yom Tov to be used, for example, before the advent of diapers. If you have little kids in the house and every now and then it's like Yehuda Moisa Oida, it's good to have ashes to cover it. So for example, that's just an example. So you are allowed to move an entire portable heater because some of it can be used. Agav kitmei, because of the ashes, if they were pre-designated to be used to cover dirt, even though that they also have in it broken pieces of wood that are muktzah. In other words, if you have something that is both muktzah and non-muktzah, you can move it all. So why would you not be allowed to move, even though the shirayim of the non-Jew is asur b'hana'ah, but the cup is a proper receptacle? Din and muktzah answers the Gemara. There are different levels of muktzah. Over there, shivrei eitzim is taka muktzah, but on Shabbos, but it's not asur b'hana'ah. Lavisurei anonim. So the level of muktzah is a lower level of muktzah. Over here, since the goy's shirayim of wine is going to become asur b'hana'ah, it's interesting. It creates a more stringent level of muktzah, and even if you are carrying the cup The cup is a proper keli. You may not carry the cup. So you can't go ahead.
Is the wine that the non-Jew drank, isn't that just called stam yenam?
Stam yenam is also about no. Let's go over here. We learned that Gemara and Avodah Zarah. Okay. Now, I don't understand. Every time you have a pile of trash, which is something that happens commonly, you are allowed to take out a garbage out of your house on Shabbos and on Yom Tov. Ayetz mutza, because something that is repulsive, Chazal said, take it out. V'lehevi, why don't we view the shirayim inside someone's plate or inside someone's cup is also repulsive? Why would this not be like a graf shel re'i? And a graf shel re'i, even if it's muktzah, because it comes from an isur hana'ah, still is allowed to be removed. So Amalei, the reason why I hold again, you cannot have a non-Jewish guest is because yes, post facto, you are allowed to take it out of your house. You can move it out. You can take it to the kitchen, sink. But lachatchila, knowing that you're creating a graf shori'i is something that is not allowed. Weiter, what do we paskin like? Says the Gemara that adibirei Rava lamar Shmuel. Interesting expression. Rava walked Mar Shmuel, or he led like a daber, like a leader. Dabor echad l'dor, v'loshnei dabarim l'dor. V'darash mezamrim esanochli b'Shabbos. No, we don't paskin like that. You are allowed to invite a non-Jew around your table for Shabbos, but like we said above, like Rabbi Shua ben Levi, not like the leniency of Rav Huna. And by the way, it could be Rav Huna only gave that leniency because it's soldiers. You have to put that into the equation, that you cannot invite a goy b'Yom Tov. Indeed, because Gezeda Shema Yarba B'Shvila, you might end up making more food for him. You might end up making more food. If a guy walked into their home, in other words, they're not saying that you can invite, but we're learning now the final din is what happens if your non-Jew walks into your house. See, there's a big difference between you inviting, but once someone walks into your house, you're not going to kick them out. Don't do that. All what they said was, Amrulei, they told, okay, good, Baruch Hamaboyim. If what we have already prepared is going to be good enough for you, in other words, if there won't be any bad feelings that we're not making extra food for you, if you're going to eat from what's already here, then mutav good. But but if you need more than what we have, they told them we're not allowed to do it by halachim. Tircha yesera adaita didoch. Like Tarchina, they were open with him. Told him we have certain restrictions. If the food here is good enough, Shalom Al Yisrael, if you're going to need more food, we won't be allowed to do it. When that happens, there's no problem with the guy coming to sit around your table on Shabbos. The big discussion in the Periscope is, what about inviting a guy from the outset and telling him that in the beginning, that there are many limitations on what we could, what we cannot make. So, whatever there will be, there'll be. Or is this something only allowed to be done if he walked in on you? That's the big question. Chavra, let's move on weiter. Okay, then this Mishnah is huge, as we spoke about in the introduction, because we're going to learn about the concept of davar hashava l'chol nefesh. Something that's common to most people is essential, even according to Beis Hillel. Beis Shammai says, Lo yecham adam chamam l'raglav. On Yom Tov, one may not warm up warm water to wash your feet. I want to tell you, washing your feet doesn't only mean feet. It means washing your feet, and washing your hands, and washing your face. Panav yadav v'raglav. Now, if you would subscribe to mitoich shehutra lo'oichel nefesh, hutra shaloi lo'oichel nefesh, you would be allowed to warm up warm water to wash your feet. Beis Shammai lishitasam. We began with choitzah, but they don't subscribe to mitoich. They hold not only food-related malachas can be done. You can warm up food or water to drink. You can't warm up water to wash yourself. So you cannot wash you cannot warm up water to wash your feet. Only if these waters also are potable and they could be drunk and they could be consumed. Beis Hillel is matir. Now, the last Tosfos is so important. The last Tosfos in the Amid. He makes 2 points. Number one, let's read the whole thing inside. Says Tosfos im Taimar. I don't understand. Even if it's fit to be consumed, so what? You're making it for bathing, for washing your feet. You're not allowed to do that. Clarifies Tosfos. You know what Beis Shammai is saying? You are allowed to warm up water to wash your feet if you will end up drinking some of that water. The Yashayim the Maida can go in shoyse. Now, the chiddush is that you only need to drink 1 cup. You're warming up 2 cups amounts. But since some of it will be consumed, that's why you are allowed. Wow. In other words, Beis Shammai only allows you if you actually drink from it. This hoyel or mitoich, since you could, means nothing. Number 1. Number 2 says Tosfos, the second to last line, that when Basil says that you are allowed, it does not mean that you can warm up and hold bath. No, the Mishnah is speaking about washing your feet. The darka v'dafka l'raglov. But avalachol gufay, the last line in Tosfos, Basil is moide the asr. I mitoich shehutra l'tzorich echol nefesh hutra shaloi l'tzorich echol nefesh, says Tosfos, because what are you allowed to do? Only davar hashavel echol nefesh. Shavel echol nefesh means something that's common to most people. In those days, who took a bath? Only the fancy people. They didn't have plumbing then. The common was people washed their hands and their feet and their face every day. A bath was a chiddush. It was not done every day. That's so important. I'll give you one practical application. When I grew up, and many of you, when you grew up, people would smoke on Yom Tov. People would smoke on Yom Tov because you're making fire. It's not oichel nefesh. So what? Hutra. But smoking now, smoking cigarettes is no longer shavel l'chol nefesh. It's not done by the majority of the people. It's done by a very small minority of the people. So therefore, according to many poskim, smoking on Yom Tov is also midoraisa. What about the counter? What about hot showers? That's this whole topic. Do we say that since it's more common now, shavel l'chol nefesh, things that was prohibited in the times of Chazal may be permitted nowadays? Because what we have to look at, the criteria is this shavel l'chol nefesh or is it not shavel l'chol nefesh? And let's leave it at that and let's go weiter. We got to move on. Next line in the Mishnah, a person is allowed to make a bonfire connected to warm yourself up by the bonfire. The question is, who made that last statement? Is that Beis Hillel or even Beis Shammai? They asked in the yeshiva, who learned this last din in the Mishnah? Is it Divrei Hakol? Is it everyone? How can Beis Shammai allow it? Guys, Beis Shammai only allows food related. Because Vishani Luhula Beis Shammai differentiates Bein Hanos Kol Gufei. When you make a bonfire, since it's to warm up your entire body, listen to this logic, something that benefits your entire body is like food, is food. And therefore Beis Shammai will allow it. Theoretically, if you would be allowed to warm up a bath for your whole body, if that's shavel l'chol nefesh, then Beis Shammai would also allow it according to this logic. No, it's something that's l'chol gufay is food. And bashenkin, you're only washing your feet, that's not called food. So therefore it's l'kula alma, or no, dilma, that this statement is only following Beis Hillel Ketanila, but according to Beis Shammai, lo yishanilo, there is no such differentiation. No, if it's not mamish food related, you may not do it, and we know the answer, Tashema, we learned in a Beitzah, Beis Shammai oimrim lo yasa adam adura, a person is not allowed to make a bonfire in order to warm yourself up, only Beis Hillel is mated. No, food related means food related. Food is like Chassidus says, there is, pnimi and makif, that which goes inside of you. Making a bonfire is not something that you ingest, and you don't internalize. It's something that goes around you. That's exactly what food is not. Torah is lechem, mitzvahs amal bushem. Because of that, Torah goes inside of you, and the mitzvahs stay around you. Something that does not go inside of you, even though you can say the warmth, I'm cold to my bones. Maybe that's the question. We don't view it that way. It's about warming up the outer environment, not the inner person. Let's go back. It says the Mishnah, even though, yes, we know that we normally follow Beis Hillel. And Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel ain't a Mishnah. Nevertheless, says the Holy Mishnah, there were 3 dinim that was said by Rabban Gamliel was machmir like Beis Shammai. And here are the 3 dinim. Din number 1, ein toimnim esachamin. We're going to take out the word lechatchila as we see in the side in the Mishnah. So we don't have this word. Ein toimnim esachamin b'yom tov. So step number 1 is nachamol, insulating food, putting it in a material that will maintain, not add, maintain its heat. is something that's prohibited rabbinically to be done on Shabbos. Hatmana on Shabbos is asur midrabanan. On Yom Tov, I can actually cook the food. But if I want to insulate food for Shabbos, but Friday is Yom Tov, so I'm doing an act of Hatmana on Yom Tov. For Shabbos, Rabbi Gamliel was machmir by saying you cannot do it. And the obvious question is, whoa, is there an Erev Tavshilin? Is there no Erev Tavshilin? The Gemara is going to ask that question. Hold on. Din number 2. Each one will be explained in the Gemara. You may not have a candlestick stood up straight on Yom Tov. Let's leave that for the Gemara. Number 3, you may not bake thick loaves of bread on Yom Tov. Ela rekikin, only wafers, only skinny ones. Omar Rabban Gamliel, miyameyem shel beis Abba. I take from my family's minhagim. Lo hoyo oifen pitim geritzim. We never baked thick breads, thick loaves of bread on Yom Tov. Ela rekikin. So Amru Loi, they told Rabban Gamliel, just because your family had that minig, manasa lebeis avicham. We should not paskin a halacha because of it. Why not? Because Bachlal, the attitude of your family was they were machmer for themselves. Not because that was the halacha. Actually, they were machmer for themselves, even though they knew it's not the halacha, because if others would ask them a question, if someone would ask them, can you bake different types of loaves of bread? We'll see what the issue will be. You can bake not only pitim geritzim, but also you can bake thick loaves. They would tell people you can bake charorim, means cold baked bread. We'll see what the issue might be. So just because we have some pictures of it, whatever that will be, the point is that just because Beis Amma, that your family had certain chumras, is fine. It's a chumrah of your family, but it's not the halacha. Let's leave all this for the Gemara. Let's focus on the first of the 3. The first of the 3 is that Rabban Gamliel was machmer that you may not insulate hot water on Yom Tov for Shabbos. Hechidami mimanavshach. Ida anachidu v'tavshilin. Then my Talmud the Beis Shammai. Why not? You can warm up with fire hot water for Shabbos. So hold on. So why is that a machlekes b'Shammai and Beis Hillel? Even according to Beis Hillel, if you have no erev tavshilin, then my Talmud the Beis Hillel that he would allow you to insulate. We'll begin with the first approach. Then we'll leave the rest for the next year. The other ones for the next year. Approach number 1 is from Rav Huna. The case of our Mishnah is the law hiniach eruv tavshilin. There is no eruv tavshilin. And even though on Atkan we learned that if you have no erev tavshilin, you may not bake, you may not cook, you may not prepare from Yom Tov, from Shabbos. But now we're going to learn an exception that a very small amount of food, however you define that, very small amount means kidei chayav. It's bare minimum, bare sustenance is allowed according to Beis Hillel, not according to Beis Shammai. What would be water, bare minimum, that the water that's already hot, keep insulated? And Afuna Latame, the Amar Afuna, the last line of the Amid, Mi Shalo Yinech Eruv Tavshilin. In a case where you cannot rely on the Rav of your city, there is no Eruv Tavshilin. So yeah, we get it. We learned. We began the chapter. You can't make from Yom Tov to Shabbos, but at the bare minimum you could. And what's the bare minimum? Oifen loy pas achas. Oifen loy doesn't only mean someone else can do it for you. That's very important. Oifen loy means that if need be, you do it for you. Only one bread, so that's one baked item. You can have one cooked food, one daf chav beis. Now we're adding something that we never mentioned until now, which is lighting candles on Yom Tov for Shabbos, which is what we do every Erev Shabbos. Creating light in your house for Shabbos, according to the pshat of our Gemara now, is also problematic if you did not make an Eruv Tavshilin.
Rabbi, why can't it be soimach on someone else's eruv?
If there was another eruv in the city tzvika, then you could be soimach. We're speaking about a case where you cannot be soimach. Either you were poisheya, or because you're living in Big Bear and there's no rav there over here that's making anything. Okay, umadlik and lo yasaner. No, you cannot, but the minimum you could. That's the top places, and that's our nusach and eruv tavshilin. I think it's a loaded daf today. Look inside the top places. Mikan mashma should sorich lahasker bebirchas eruvin eruv tavshilin yeheshara levashule, which is what we say. Ula afuye ula adluke shraga. Because here you see, you didn't make an eruv tafshilin, so making fire is a problem, but one you can make. Let's go weiter. Another minimum. You can be tzoyle, you can roast a small fish. Now, 1 second. Let's read the Tanya. I want you to know that Rav Huna is not himself. Rav Huna is an Amayra. He's based on a Tana. Tanya nami hachi, mishlei necheru v'tavshilin, oifen lei pasachas. And here we have mamish related to our Mishnah. And v'toimlin loi kadera achas. We may insulate one pot. Umadlikin lei asaner. Umechaben lei kitan echad. You can even warm up 1 kitain of water. So therefore, the case of our Mishnah is a person forgot to make an eruv. Since there's no eruv tafshilin, even a minimum amount of insulating is also libei shamai. Basil is mated because of this heter that come on, the guy didn't do an eruv tafshilin. Epis, you allow him, and Gamliel was machmer like beishamai chevra, a lot more to be continued, God willing, after on God's day, Friday morning, Motzoi. Yom HaKippurim.
Rabbi, you just clarify this last thing. When Gamliel is passing like Beishamai,
he's machmer like Beishamai, yeah.
Is that only in the case where there was no eruv tafshilin? But if there was an eruv tafshilin, are we saying that Beishamai holds that even if there's an eruv tafshilin, he still can't do that?
No, forget. The Beishamai holds that if you did not make an eruv tafshilin, there is no dispensation. You can't say I'm only doing a bare minimum. There's no bare minimum. You can't even insulate. Can't even insulate. That's Rav Huna. We'll see later. There's Abaye, there's different ways of understanding the case of the Mishnah.
Interesting that Rabbi Gamliel is the grandson of
Hillel.
Okay.
Thank you for pointing that out. Exactly.
Like
Very good. But don't forget, the Mishnah concluded that a base Abba by him wasn't the halachit. They were machmer.
Guys.
Thank you.